You're listening to a podcast from the BBC World Service. This is Hard Talk with me, Zeinab Badawi. Thanks for downloading this edition of the programme, and I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to Hard Talk with me, Zeinab Badawi, from the Saudi Arabian port city of Jeddah. I'm at the headquarters of the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, where my guest is Iyad Ameen Madani, the OIC's Secretary-General, who's been in the post for 2 years. Mr. Madani, a Saudi national, speaks as the collective voice of a body that represents the world's 57 Muslim nations. But with large parts of the Muslim world torn apart by sectarian strife and with acts of terror perpetrated by Muslims across continents, what can he do or say to combat the challenges? Secretary-General Iyad Ameen Madani, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you very much.
As leader of the world's only pan-Islamic organisation, you must be extremely worried when you look around the world and you see constantly acts of terror being committed by Muslims. You must be having sleepless nights.
Well, we all worry about terrorism. Our position, though, in the OIC, that terrorism has no religion, has no ethnicity, has no gender. So we don't think of terror as necessarily Islamic or a cause and effect with Islam.
I didn't say there was a link between Islam and acts of terror, but you must accept that when you look around the world, be it Europe, France, Burkina Faso in Africa, Indonesia in Asia, the Arab world, Libya, wherever you look, there are terrible deeds, acts of terror committed by Muslims.
It's always more useful to speak specifically. Let's talk about Iraq, for example, as a place among those places where acts of violence are taking place and where Muslims live and other religious groups live as well. Iraq was invaded. All the institutions in Iraq were dismantled: the army, the party, the bureaucracy, the security forces. A discourse of sectarianism was encouraged. Everybody was identified either as a Sunni or a Shia or a Kurd or an Arab. It was a process of marginalization, of exclusion. So we created an environment that almost invited violence because people found violence as a way to get back. So I think we should understand every location within its own context.
Okay, but just picking up Iraq, which you've mentioned, the Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi said last year, if what you said, the kind of thing you've just said, is true, we need an explanation then, he says, why there are so many terrorists from Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, Egypt, European countries. He's right, isn't he?
Why are they there?
Yes.
What attracts them?
If you say it's a failure of, lack of institutions, not enough security forces in Iraq, he himself is questioning that hypothesis by saying, if that's the case, why do you have acts of terror committed in European countries or by non-Iraqis?
Again, we have to put this in a wider context. As you know, ever since the end of the Cold War, there has been strong voices in many of the countries outside of the OIC member states who have done their best to picture Islam and Muslims as the new other, the new opponent, so to speak. There was no longer, red was no longer the color that is a color to warn us about danger. It has become green. And we see this in many of the political statements.
Green being the color of Islam.
The color of Islam, intellectual statements. Now, when there is an area of conflict like Iraq, or more so in Syria, where a country, a whole country is being destroyed because the international community sort of had a cold drink and a comfortable seat and watched while the country destroyed itself by what started as very peaceful demonstration in Dar'a asking for better life. When you create that vacuum, when you create that environment, and when you put a context of struggle between two sides, when you put a context of clash of civilizations, then you end up attracting people who either come because they believe that they can get back by taking part in Iraq. Why do you get people from Chechnya?
Well, why don't you answer that question, though, Secretary General, with all respect, because you're talking about Iraq and Syria, and obviously there are huge conflicts going on there. But the wider point that's been made here is that you've got Muslims who are Europeans committing acts of terror in Europe. You've got Muslims who are Indonesians committing acts of terror in Indonesia. Wherever you look in the Muslim world, and it's not sufficient to just point to the failure to intervene in countries of conflict as the reason why you're seeing this.
Well, but I think what you said is partial. If you can look any country, there are groups of people who are committing violence. But now we have decided to call some sorts of violence terror and other sorts of violence as misguided individuals. Individuals with some psychological problems, or they were mistreated by their parents or by their schoolmates or by this or that. If you just account for all the acts of violence that a country like the United States has seen, you will find out statistically that those committed by Muslims are really a fraction of those actions of violence. But we have decided to call those as acts of terror and the others as individual acts.
But that is the case, though, isn't it? I tell you what President Obama said in December. He said, you cannot deny the fact that an extremist ideology has spread within some Muslim communities. I put it to you with all respect, it sounds as though you are denying that.
I'm denying associating terror with Muslims or Muslim communities. I think the error we make here when we analyze terror as something that has something to do with a religion.
But isn't it the case when, if Muslims are committing acts of terror and they are describing themselves as Muslims, acting within their own warped idea of Islam, you cannot then, as head of the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation that represents all the Muslim countries of the world, say, these people have got nothing to do with us, have got nothing to do with Islam. They themselves define themselves as Muslims.
What I'm saying is we have to understand the context. If we are to face up to this phenomena, which concerns all of us, regardless of what religion or non-religion we believe in, we have to understand context. What is the social context? What is the economic root causes? What is the environment that creates such a situation? If I may just go to another geographical area, you go to Boko Haram in Nigeria. If you visit the northeast of Nigeria, where Boko Haram's stronghold is, you will find high level of unemployment. You'll find young people drifting in the streets with no sense of their worthiness, with no mission, with no future to look at. They end up either as drug addicts, petty criminals, or suddenly they are given this message of active recruitment that gives them a sense of themselves, a sense of what they are.
Poverty is one reason you're saying, and unemployment.
Social marginalization.
But so everybody who's socially marginalized is poor, is unemployed. You're trying to explain and to some extent excuse their acts of terror, killing other people, usually people who are as poor as themselves.
No, but usually such acts always harm some communities. If you go back to Los Angeles, if you recall those big demonstrations and the acts, one of the first the United States has witnessed in Los Angeles, the first damage was the areas where Afro-Americans lived. They took their Venice out in their own community first, because this is what's in front of them. What I'm arguing is that terrorism has no religion, that terrorism is against all believers in whatever religion, all communities.
You're saying that, but you're saying, look at northern Nigeria, you're talking about poverty. There are some very rich terrorists. Osama bin Laden came from one of the richest countries in Saudi Arabia. Ayman al-Zawahiri, his successor as leader of Al-Qaeda, is an Egyptian pediatrician. These are educated, not marginalized people. So what you say really can't hold as an explanation as to why some people turn to terror?
Osama started in the Afghani Mujahideen war. We all supported the Mujahideen at the time.
And they became the Taliban. Saudi Arabia supported the Mujahideen.
And the United States and many others.
Yes.
But once the Soviets withdrew or decided to withdraw, we forgot all about these Mujahideen that we have created, supported, encouraged, applauded. We did not do any post-conflict management.
But there you are
we
again.
left them on their own.
But Secretary General...
And then we blame
people
others.
Like Osama bin Laden.
Well, he is to be blamed, of course.
But you are blaming outside forces all the time. Your mission statement is to safeguard the true values of Islam. President Hassan Rouhani said at the end of last year that it is our greatest duty to correct the image of Islam in world public opinion. And he is saying there that the image of Islam has become tarnished.
You know,
but is he
Zainab,
right or is he wrong?
It's not a beauty contest. I'm a Muslim. And I don't think we are Muslim. As Muslims, we are there to convince anybody that we are good people. Muslims represent a quarter of the planet population. There are millions upon millions of Muslims who are doctors and engineers and students and good citizens in whatever country they are.
Of course.
So we cannot just put a label on the quarter of the planet population.
Of course, I was not making that implication, but
Muslims,
that minority, that tiny minority is wrecking it for everybody else. You see incidents of Islamophobia now have really increased. I mean, I don't have to quote you opinion polls. You know that this is a fact that, you know, Muslims wherever feel that the name of Islam has been hijacked by this small minority who had their warped ideology. And you need to understand and accept that and not say it's the fault of outside forces.
I never said it's the fault of outside forces. I said we have to understand context. Secondly, another reason is you said hijack. Those people who claim Islamic legitimacy to their causes. It is certainly the responsibility of Muslims before anybody else to prove these people wrong. This is different from a public relations campaign to say we are nice because we are Muslims. Please don't worry if
but you need to do something fast.
We move into the house next door to you.
But you need to do something fast. You've got Donald Trump, one of the Republican presidential contenders in the United States, one of the leading ones, saying, close the door, ban all Muslims going into the United States, and those who are US citizens have surveillance of them. And, you know, that kind of opinion is quite popular with vast numbers in the population.
Mr. Trump has been saying many things. He also wants to build a nice, beautiful wall across the borders of Mexico. But he wants to hold the keys to the gates. You know, it's the constituents of Mr. Trump who have to judge him.
Have you written to him and said, this isn't right, that you should whip up this kind of anti-Muslim fervour? Because arguably that's what he's doing.
You know, he's a candidate, and candidates usually say many wild things, and we leave it to his constituencies to judge him. For those of us who lived in the United States as students, we believe that this is a great country with great people, with great values. We think that Mr. Trump will be just another bubble.
Okay, we focus very much, inevitably, as the international media often does, on acts of terror committed globally in Europe, be it Paris or whatever. But actually, the fact of the matter is, Muslims are killing other Muslims. The vast majority of the victims of acts of terror, wherever they are, Libya, Iraq, Syria, are Muslims. About 90 to 95% of the victims are Muslims. That is something that must make you despair.
No.
What, you're not in despair that Muslims are killing other Muslims in vast numbers?
Why don't you talk about the Muslims being killed by the Israelis, all those Palestinians?
Because you are head of the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation,
yes.
57 Muslim countries, and you have got people in those countries killing other people in those countries. You've got Yemenis killing other Yemenis in Yemen, you've got Libyans killing other Libyans in Libya, you've got Syrians killing other Syrians in Syria, Iraqis killing, I could go on and on. That is a lamentable state of affairs.
But you're summing up many different contradictory things, Zainab. Let's take Libya. First of all, the Muslim world is not just this region. The Muslim world extends from Indonesia to the east to Dakar to the west. And we have to recognize that these people are Muslims, and there is not much killing taking
well,
place
in
in
Bangladesh,
Central
you've got
Asia.
Muslims killing some
But
Muslims.
let's take Libya. Why is Libya disintegrating now?
I know you're going to say it's because the
we
removal of
tolerated
Gaddafi.
No, we tolerated Gaddafi. We built his tents in the best well-known squares in the European capitals. Exactly the same way where we send horses by cargo planes to celebrate the birthday of the emperor of Burkina Faso. We catered for those dictators. Why? Because we wanted to sell them something.
And that's what Libyans, and that's why
Now,
Libyans are killing other Libyans.
This is why Libya disintegrated. There was only Gaddafi. There was no system, no institution. So you decided to get rid of Gaddafi. You did not listen to the African initiative that was pushed forward by African leaders to find a solution for that. Now the country disintegrated, a country that had no institutions, the country that was led by a man who thought he has invented a theory of non-institution.
Okay, so that's the context.
A country that was sold mountains of weapons.
So you're blaming the outside world again,
I'm explaining the phenomena. I'm not blaming anybody. Now, most of the foreign ministers, the prime ministers of these countries, go around as salespersons selling these countries arms.
Well, let me ask
now, when
you,
there is a war, Zainab,
yes.
when the United States go into a war, there is a war economy. If one plane is shut down, there are factories that make another plane. So there is a war wealth. Now, when a country that buys arms loses a rocket or a bullet, they have to buy another one.
I will bring us back to the point I was trying to make to you, which is Muslims killing Muslims. Let's just look at one way.
It's extremists killing others, not Muslims killing Muslims.
But what about the fact that we now see, Libya is uniformly Sunni, so I'm not going to talk about it in the context of a Sunni-Shia divide in the region. And now we are seeing that there is a religious divide between Sunnis and Shias, which is being manifested in most dreadful rivalry, you could say, with Saudi Arabia, the Sunni state, against Iran, the Shia state. And we see civil war in Yemen with Iranians on one side, Saudi Arabians on the other. We see the same in Syria, and so on and so forth.
It's a political conflict that we are witnessing. It's not a Shia-Sunni conflict. What is happening is clash of political influence. And this is where the OIC tries to come in, to find that rapprochement, to that new paradigm that will define the problem as a political problem.
So are you trying to get a rapprochement
of course we are.
Between Saudi Arabia and Iran? We see the world normalizing relations with Iran. Would you push for better relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran?
Well, the world is happy that they can sign more contracts in Iran.
So are they trying to normalize relations?
To sign more contracts with Myanmar in spite of the atrocities
but
taking place.
You? Because
but of course the OIC is actively working, actively promoting the absolute necessity for a paradigm in this region. We don't want this region to be the liability of the Muslim world, the burden of the Muslim world. There is so much that this region shares. They share the neighborhood, that will not change. They share the religion. About 1 million Iranis come to Saudi Arabia every year for Hajj and Umrah. That will not stop.
But then,
they share the same national resource.
But if you are supposed to enhance and consolidate the bonds of fraternity and solidarity amongst member states, as your mission statement states, why then did you recently say in your communique from the OIC that you condemned Iran for meddling in the affairs of Bahrain, Yemen, Somalia, Syria, and you condemn them for that?
Well, it's not us who said that. It's
the OIC.
The foreign ministers who met and agreed to say this. It was not a statement initiated by the body of the OIC as secretariat.
But it doesn't further a rapprochement, does it?
Well, this is why we need a rapprochement. Okay. What the communique did is to condemn, like everybody else did, the breaking into the diplomatic offices in
after
Tehran
the execution of Sheikh and Nimr.
And some member states found it that that should be expanded to look into their domestic stage. But there are other items in the communique that calls for such a rapprochement.
Right. I want to
for
ask
a political process.
Briefly, I want to ask you on two issues. You talk about the need to solve the conflicts in countries like Syria and Iraq. Saudi Arabia announced in December a 34-member Muslim bloc to fight terrorism, because it wants everybody to come into that, but really it's not getting a lot of traction. Shouldn't the OIC be doing more to say it is the role of Muslim states, it is their responsibility, be they commit troops, money, effort, whatever, to try to stop the conflicts?
Well, in 1990, the OIC was among the first international organizations to agree to a convent against terrorism and act of terrorism, and a code of conduct that commits its member states. So the OIC as a body, as an international organization, has recognized this threat and has agreed to the structure of how to deal with that threat, and is still doing so.
What's the likelihood of getting everybody to act together, though, with all the differences?
We are more than just this. We are an organization that is involved in economic development, in outreach programs, in humanitarian developments, in encouraging science and technology. We'll be having a summit just on science and technology.
Briefly on humanitarian, why aren't Muslim countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Gulf states that are rich, doing more to take in Syrian refugees? I know Turkey, Jordan and Lebanon have taken in a great number of Syrian refugees.
That's the bulk of them.
Yeah, the bulk of them. But the Gulf states could do more, other Muslim states. These are Muslim refugees by and large.
All the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, have announced figures of number of Syrians that they have accepted and who live in their countries, whether they are students or workers or just refugees. But the bulk of the Syrian refugees live in the neighboring countries. Yeah. And I think the question of Syrian refugees is important, especially within a European context. But the solution is not to think about what to do with those who have arrived at the doors of Europe. It's to address the conflict itself. Syrians did not go to Scandinavia because they want to enjoy the cold weather, because they want to live.
But why can't they go to Malaysia, Indonesia, whatever, you name it, one of the 57 Muslim countries?
The logistics are easier. There is, as you know, human trafficking across the Mediterranean to Europe for decades now.
Briefly and finally, this is feeding into the anti-Islamic sentiment, when we see the attacks on women in Cologne in Germany. Muslims are getting a bad name, and you need to act together in concert as all the countries to tackle that.
We are, but you also have to understand, I'm sure you do 1,000 times better than I do, the political terrain in Europe, where all the right-wing groups, those who have anger at the system, and now the symbol they express their anger at has become Muslims. It was immigrants, and now it is Muslims. It's a rightist policy that also want to use Muslims, refugees, as part of a political agenda.
Secretary General Iyad Ameen Madani, thank you very much indeed for coming on Hard Talk.
Shukran jazeelan.
This edition of Hard Talk was presented by me, Zeinab Badawi. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.